There's a special kind of loneliness that has no name. Not in English, not in Comanche, not in any of the dozen broken tongues stitched together on the frontier. It's the loneliness of a man standing between two worlds, claimed by neither. For 31 years, Lucas Redhawk had lived inside that loneliness. He learned to wear it like other men wear their hats quietly, without complaint, as if it were just part of the weather. He rode into Redemption Creek, Texas, on a Tuesday in the dying heat of August 1874. His horse, a paint marais, was named two colors. Lucas was tall in the saddle, lean and straight-backed. He had his mother's dark copper skin and his father's gray eyes, a combination that had been making strangers uncomfortable his entire life. At his hip, a Colt revolver. Around his neck, on a thin leather cord, a single hawk feather his mother had tied there the morning she died. Redemption Creek was a town in the process of giving up. Storefronts were boarded up, the church bell was cracked, and the main street was so dusty it looked like the earth itself had lost interest in holding things together. The cattle drives had moved north 2 years ago, and all that remained were people too stubborn or too broke to leave. And then there were the criminals who moved in the moment the law moved out. The sheriff's office had a sign where the word sheriff was crossed out in black paint, and underneath it, gone. 3 weeks ago, Lucas had received a letter from the town mayor, Artis Webb. It was simple. Our sheriff is dead. Our deputy is bought. Our town is dying. We need someone no one else will send us. Please come. Lucas read that letter 4 times, and each time he told himself he wouldn't go. But those last 2 words, please come, made it impossible to say no. He had barely tied his horse to the post when the deputy appeared. Roy Cole, thick-necked and mean-eyed, a man who had never been held accountable for anything in his life. Roy Cole looked at Lucas's commission paper, then at his face and said slowly, "They sent a half-breed to be our law." Lucas calmly folded the paper and put it back in his pocket. "They sent me," he said quietly. "Whether you find that funny or not is your business." The mayor told him everything. He explained how a man named Vance Holloway had arrived 8 months ago, buying up the saloon, the bank, and the deputy. The previous sheriff, Tom Harding, had refused to be bought. 3 months later, he was found dead in the creek. The official verdict was drowning. Tom Harding couldn't swim a stroke in his life, Artis Webb said softly. Everybody knew it. Nobody said it. Lucas looked at him, his gaze steady. They will now. That same afternoon, he found 3 of Holloway's men in an alley. They were surrounding a young woman, Ilara Reyes, dark-haired, steady-eyed. She wasn't backing down an inch as they demanded the deed to her farm. Lucas stepped in, showed his badge, and sent them walking. Ilara looked him right in the eye, no discomfort in her gaze, only an honest assessment. She told him the truth that mattered most. Holloway wanted her farm because the creek ran through it, the only clean water source for 5 miles in any direction. "Now you know what this is really about," she said, then walked away without a backward glance. That evening, Vance Holloway himself paid a visit. Broad-shouldered, silver-haired, radiating an unshakable confidence, he walked into the sheriff's office with 4 men behind him. He sat across from Lucas's desk without being invited. "This town runs the way I say it runs," Holloway said. The last man who sat in that chair understood that eventually. "I'm offering you the chance to understand it sooner." "And if I don't?" Lucas asked. Holloway smiled a wide, cold, patient smile. "Son, I have broken harder men than you, and none of them were carrying the disadvantages you are." The word hung in the air like smoke. Lucas let it hang. Then he leaned forward slightly. "Mr. Holloway," he said. Holloway smiled a wide, cold, patient smile. "Son, I have broken harder men than you, and none of them were carrying the disadvantages you are." The word hung in the air like smoke. Lucas let it hang. Then he leaned forward slightly. "Mr. Holloway," he said. A Comanche woman named Swiftwater who had loved a white rancher and spent her life welcomed by neither world. The morning she died, she had tied the hawk feather around his throat and told him, "You belong to both worlds." That is not a curse, it is a gift. The day will come when only someone like you can stand where 2 worlds meet and hold them, apart long enough for peace to breathe. He was only 16 then, and hadn't understood. But he understood now. The saloon at the far end of the street was still loud. A dog barked, then went silent. The wind whispered under the door. And then a sound sharp and deliberate. A single stone struck the window. Before the echo died, Lucas was on his feet. A folded piece of paper slid under the door. He picked it up and opened it. 4 words, written in a rough, urgent hand: "They will kill Ilara." He put on his hat and walked out into the dark Texas night. He didn't know who sent the note, or how deep the corruption ran, or how many men Holloway truly owned. But he knew the one thing he had always known: in every hard town, every difficult moment, every time the world had decided he did not belong, he was still here. He was still standing. And before this was over, Redemption Creek was going to learn exactly what that meant. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story, please like, share, and subscribe for more. We'll see you in the next one. There is no rest for a man who has made an enemy of the most powerful person in town. Lucas Redhawk was up before dawn, standing at the cracked window of the sheriff's office. He watched Redemption Creek come slowly to life in the gray early light, the note still clutched in his hand. 4 words that had changed the shape of everything. They will kill Ilara. Standing at the cracked window of the sheriff's office. He watched Redemption Creek come slowly to life in the gray early light, the note still clutched in his hand. 4 words that had changed the shape of everything. They will kill Ilara. He had witnessed Holloway's crimes from the very beginning, and he had written everything down. Names, dates, payments, orders, a full damning account recorded in a leather journal, hidden somewhere on the farm. Carlos had died 4 months ago, just 1 week after Tom Harding. He had witnessed Holloway's crimes from the very beginning, and he had written everything down. Names, dates, payments, orders, a full damning account recorded in a leather journal, hidden somewhere on the farm. Carlos had died 4 months ago, just 1 week after Tom Harding. It was proof of a massive land scheme, 50 miles wide, that would give one man control of every single water source in the region. He'd have the power to charge every cattleman in West Texas just for the right to graze their herds. Ilara brought the journal. It was proof of a massive land scheme, 50 miles wide, that would give one man control of every single water source in the region. He'd have the power to charge every cattleman in West Texas just for the right to graze their herds. Ilara brought the journal from inside her house and handed it to Lucas without any ceremony. Roy Cole's face cycled through surprise, then anger, then calculation, before finally settling into a pale and careful stillness. Lucas spoke quietly, but his words carried weight. "I'm sending this to the federal marshal in Austin today by rider. When it arrives, they'll verify it within a week, and every name in this book will answer for what they did." He paused, letting the reality sink in. Roy Cole's face cycled through surprise, then anger, then calculation, before finally settling into a pale and careful stillness. Lucas spoke quietly, but his words carried weight. "I'm sending this to the federal marshal in Austin today by rider. When it arrives, they'll verify it within a week, and every name in this book will answer for what they did." He paused, letting the reality sink in. He had already filed false claims on 4 properties along the creek. And most urgently, he had 3 professional hired guns riding in from San Antonio, expected to arrive in just 2 days. Lucas didn't waste a second. He sent the journal to Austin with the fastest rider his last dollar could buy. Then he sat in the sheriff's office and thought. He had already filed false claims on 4 properties along the creek. And most urgently, he had 3 professional hired guns riding in from San Antonio, expected to arrive in just 2 days. Lucas didn't waste a second. He sent the journal to Austin with the fastest rider his last dollar could buy. Then he sat in the sheriff's office and really thought about what 2 days meant. A fraudulent county order declaring Lucas's commission as sheriff invalid, signed by one of his bought commissioners. It was designed to strip him of his authority by morning. But instead of posting it for all to see, Roy Cole brought the order directly to Lucas. That simple act told Lucas everything he needed to know. The deputy had finally definitively chosen which side he was on. Lucas read the order, folded it calmly, and set it on his desk. He walked outside into the evening street and stood looking at Redemption Creek for a long moment. He saw the broken buildings, the cracked bell in the old church tower, the road that ran through this place like an unfinished sentence. And he thought about his mother's words that had haunted him for years. Lucas read the order, folded it calmly, and set it on his desk. He walked outside into the evening street and stood looking at Redemption Creek for a long moment. He saw the broken buildings, the cracked bell in the old church tower, the road that ran through this place like an unfinished sentence. And he thought about his mother's words that had haunted him for years. A gunshot from the roof of the feed store across the street, the bullet whistling just 2 inches from his ear. Before the shooter could even adjust his aim, Lucas was already on the floor, then out the door and sprinting across the street. 60 seconds later, a man named Birch sat on that rooftop, clutching a wounded arm. Before the shooter could even adjust his aim, Lucas was already on the floor, then out the door and sprinting across the street. 60 seconds later, a man named Birch sat on that rooftop, clutching a wounded arm, all the confidence completely gone out of him. Lucas stood in the street below, his gun still warm in his hand, knowing the whole town was watching from behind their curtains. He called out, his voice loud and clear for everyone to hear, "Tell Mr. Holloway that I am still here." He walked back inside. He sat back down in his chair. The hired guns were 1 day away, and Lucas Redhawk had just decided that 1 day was enough. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like and subscribe for more. The morning of the 3rd day came cold and clear over Redemption Creek, pale gold light cutting across the rooftops. The air carried the scent of wood smoke and dry earth, and the held breath of a town that knows what is coming. I was already at my desk when a young rider came in hard from the East Road at first light. He had a letter from the federal marshal's office in Austin folded inside his shirt. The journal had arrived. The marshal had read enough in the first hour to dispatch 2 deputy marshals toward Redemption Creek immediately. They'd be arriving by late afternoon. I set the letter down beside the fraudulent commissioner's order, the leather journal, and the old sheriff's dented badge. I looked at all of it together for one long moment. Then I went to find Aldous Webb. The mayor listened with his hands pressed flat on his desk. When I finished, he asked only one question. "What do you need from me?" Not "what should I do?" Or whether he was afraid, but simply, "What do you need?" It was the question of a man who had finally decided that fear was less important than what fear had been costing him. I told him I needed the town, not fighters' witnesses. Every man and woman who had seen what Holloway had done and said nothing needed to be ready to say something before nightfall. The weight of testimony would matter more than anything else when the marshals arrived. Aldous Webb nodded. "I will talk to them," he said. "Talk fast," I told him. "The hired guns will be here by noon." They came in at 11. 3 professional men riding unhurried from the South Road, spreading out as they entered the street. Their eyes moved the way trained eyes move. None of them looking directly at the sheriff's office, even though every one of them had clocked it the moment they rode in. They went to the saloon and waited for Holloway's signal. I spent the next 2 hours not fortifying a position, but walking quietly through Redemption Creek, talking to people. I spoke to the blacksmith who had watched Holloway's men burn a neighbor's fence and said nothing. The woman at the boarding house who had overheard Roy Cole taking payment and looked away. The Chinese laundryman at the end of the street who had seen more than anyone and trusted less than anyone. But he listened carefully when I stood in his doorway and said simply, "I am not asking you to fight. I am asking you to tell the truth to a federal officer this afternoon. And the law that comes today will not be Vance Holloway's law." Holloway made his move at 1 in the afternoon. He came down the main street himself with Roy Cole at his side and the 3 hired guns behind him. He held the fraudulent order and called out for me to surrender my badge or face the consequences. The street was empty and shuttered. For one long moment, I felt the weight of a man whose faith in people might have been misplaced. Then the blacksmith's door opened. Then the boarding house. Then the laundryman. Then 4 more doors, and 6 more. The woman from the dry goods store and the old man from the livery. And Aldous Webb himself, walking into the center of the street to stand 20 feet from Vance Holloway, his ink-stained hands at his sides and his chin up. Not fighters. Witnesses. A whole town deciding all at once that silence had cost them more than speaking ever would. I walked out of the sheriff's office and stood in the afternoon light, 15 feet from Vance Holloway. Badge on my chest, hawk feather at my throat. My mother's copper skin and my father's gray eyes, exactly what they were, with no apology and no concealment. I said quietly, "I am placing you under arrest for the murders of Thomas Harding and Carlos Reyes, for fraud, for land theft, and for conspiracy. The federal marshals will be here within the hour. You can come with me now, or you can make this worse." The hired guns looked at the townspeople lining the street, looked at each other, and put their hands up, one by one. They were professionals, which meant they were good at knowing when a situation had moved beyond what their feet covered. Holloway stood alone, his fraudulent order in his hand, the weight of everything he had done pressing down on him from every direction. He looked at the town he had bought and broken and worn down until they had forgotten what standing upright felt like. And he saw them standing upright. Something went out of him all at once, the way a fire goes out when the last fuel is gone. He dropped the order in the dust. He held out his wrists. I put the irons on quietly and walked him to the jail. The federal marshals arrived at 4, took testimony, made arrests, and by sunset, the commissioner had resigned and the judge was suspended. 8 months of systematic cruelty had begun its long unraveling. That evening, I sat on the steps of the sheriff's office in the cooling air and watched the last light leave the sky. Alara Reyes came and sat beside me without being asked. We were quiet together for a while. In the way of two people who have been through something hard and do not need words to fill it. After a time, she said simply, "Will you stay?" I thought about it honestly. I thought about 31 years of standing between worlds, of being too much of one thing and not enough of another. Of carrying my mother's feather and my father's eyes through every room that had made me feel like an error rather than a man. I looked at Redemption Creek broken and stubborn and small and still here, still standing. Still capable of becoming something better than it had been in a single afternoon. I looked at Ilara. For a while, I said. She nodded. That was enough. I walked back inside as the first stars appeared over West Texas. I sat at the desk, picked up the old badge, and pinned it to my vest. I understood finally what my mother had meant all those years ago. I did not stand between two worlds. I stood in both of them, and that was not a wound. That was not a limitation. That was the whole point of me. Outside, Redemption Creek settled into its first quiet night in 8 months. The cracked church bell swayed slightly in the evening wind. It did not ring, it was still broken, there was still work to do, but it moved, and sometimes that is exactly enough. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more. See you next time.